Well, hello. In this video, what we're going to go over first is style props. That's kind of an interesting thing to know for all your components you're going to make. There's so much customization you could do. We're just going to do a run over the documentation and show you what's possible. There's no point in me explaining all of them or you even needing to memorize all of them. There's just a lot. So this is going to be a preview section. Then we're going to go into gradients because gradients are cool visually. I like gradient stuff. Then after that, we're going to go in and make some components with style props and gradients. I know we haven't covered the components themselves from Chakra, but that's okay. You don't need to know anything. This is just going to be a kind of show and tell section. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Let's begin by looking at the style props themselves. This is from the documentation. At the top it says style props are a way to alter the style of a component by passing props to it. It helps to save time by providing helpful shorthand ways to style components. And what we're going to see here as we scroll on through, and that's all this section is just me going through scrolling and describing some things, but I'm going to tell you why more options in this case, while it may take a while to get used to, provides you a lot more flexibility with styling your component. So first up here with margin and padding, yeah, it gives you some code example right here, and you'll see plenty of code in this series, but let's just focus right here. So you're importing a box, and a box is one of the most basic things in Chakra. A box could be literally anything you want it to be, which is super cool. But those are details for another video. Let's just focus on here. So what we see right here is m equals 2. And what does that correspond to down here? The property m or margin. You could use either or, and that is really good thinking on the terms of the developers, because sometimes you'll have a system that locks you into doing things one way over the other. And sometimes when you go to render something on out, because you didn't use the shorthand or whatever special naming system they wrote for you, things tend to break, and then you don't know why, because what you're actually doing is how either the JavaScript or CSS would traditionally be wrote, but since you didn't write it in their framework formatted kind of way, things break and it takes you a while to debug. So here, giving you two options for margin, margin top, margin right, all that other good stuff, that allows you to have that kind of common sense thing, or it just to be like very just concise, which is neat. And so, yeah, we see things here like margin, inline start, plus the N, MX, and MY, P for padding. This is all pretty basic stuff here. If you know anything about CSS, or if you're like me, you know enough, but then you have to look up the more complicated things once you're like, how is this thing, how do I move this thing on over? It's not responding. This is going to be your go-to. So next we're going to look at the color and background color. As we can see here, it's as easy as slapping BG in here for background right here, color. And you can see that we have gray.50 or gray.50, however you're reading it. And as you could probably assume that there are some colors that come along with Chakra that are built in. But we can see right here, you're adding this hex value in and it's taking it just fine. We also see that there's tomato right here. So yes, you're going to have colors that come in with the library, but you're also going to be able just to throw in whatever you want to, which is really, really quite nice. Up next is gradients, and gradients could get a little complex up front if you haven't used them a lot. And admittedly, I haven't used them a lot, even though they look cool. They're so much easier to do in Photoshop or literally any program out there. But they give you a way to do it here, which I think is a very, very nice way to do it. Whether or not you're used to doing it the traditional CSS way or use some other kind of library that does it for you. We have our gradients here, and it's as easy as slapping in, the BG gradient here and then saying, do you want like a radial or do you want a linear kind of gradient? And we're going to go down a little bit later and see where it says to and then -T. We're going to see what that means a little bit farther down in this section of the video. But everything is as easy as slapping this in. So you're going to have a linear type of gradient here. You're going to have to -T, which we're going to see what that means in a minute. And we're going to start at green.200, and then eventually we're going to go into pink.500. For our typography, same kind of thing here. We have font size, which is what they're using in these examples here. We could also do the text align, the line height, And what is also cool that you may be noticing is that the CSS property right here is the actual CSS property. So if you have to go in through the browser or do any kind of debugging, maybe you're doing some kind of testing, I don't know what it is you may be up to, you could see what the one-to-one correspondence here are, which is really, really nice and handy as well. So now we have layout, width, and height. We have W for width, H for height, min width, max width down here. And you could see, like the previous examples, is as easy as put in it here. Yeah, we keep using the box for an example, but like I said, this is the most flexible thing, I believe, in this library, if not one of the most flexible. So this is a good example because it is it's like water, it's like clay. You could do whatever you want to with it. So we could see here that the width on this box is going to be 100% and the height is going to be 32 pixels. Really, really easy to read. And I think that's pretty cool because once you kind of know what a box could do, whatever you make it style-wise is just so simple out of the gate. Flexbox. Yes, this has Flexbox too. It also has grid. It has everything you need. And so it's as easy as putting in display equals Flexbox. You can align your items, justify content. If you've ever used like Material UI or another library, it's as easy as just slapping those values in here, which is very, very, very nice. And grids as well you could use. So Flexbox and grids, in another video we're going to get into the layout, so you'll have a lot more in-depth, hands-on, or at least eyes-on, unless you're coding with me, examples of Flexbox and grid. And so you're going to be able to do a lot of really cool and a lot of interesting things with grids that it kind of, I think, makes easier for you than doing it maybe in a traditional sense. Next up is background. So you could just inline right here, put in the background image, the background position, no repeat on an image. That way you don't get that tiled look. And we could see down here that you still have all the abilities and properties that you would if you were to do it traditionally in CSS. But now you're able to do it in the actual component itself. And this is cool because you may be thinking, I don't want to do everything in line. I don't want to, that's not my kind of jam. But think about this. Chakra gives you the ability to create your own components, like literally your own components. There's no customization, it only goes so far. And so what you could do is create your own set of library components for your company, for you, for your branding, whatever it is. And maybe you want to add some styling later on, but you want some base things to remain the same. So with that behind my reasoning there, it's actually quite useful to kind of just bake all of these into your reusable components that you're going to use in a library repeatedly later on. Up next is borders. As you can see here, we have everything you want to do with a border contained right in here. Granted, there's no like BO for border or anything like that. These are pretty much straight what you would see if you were to type it out in JSX, border color, and then if you were to do CSS, it's border hyphen color. But a lot of that makes sense. And if you have IntelliSense as well, it'll pick up on a lot of this. And also, if you screw up like I do, like everyone does, you just have to remember, oh, it's just, camel case. That's how I have to put it in here. Border radius is another type of style prop you could pass on in. We're using buttons in this example right here. You just put in border radius right, left equals 0. You could also do the MD for medium as well. We have position. So things can be left, right, your Z index, which is, pretty important thing to consider at points, depending on what you're doing. All pretty easy right in here. You have POS, which, means many things to me in my life, depending if you're talking about a point of sale or someone you don't like. But you could just put POS right here, or even just position if you want to be a bit more verbose. And you could say if something's fixed or absolute or relative, and then you can move on with your day. We have shadow, which is pretty cool. Sometimes shadow takes a little bit of CSS to do to get it to look right and to get it to your kind of styling. And you can see right here, we have like very, very basic shadowing. But as you go on, you could even get this kind of like thick, ominous, dark looking background right here. And you could even do something where you just kind of make the outline of your, button, or in this case, box down here, have this like pop out kind of effect, which is cool because it's not like you can only use a shadow on something. You can only use a gradient on something, right? You can mix and match these things. So you could use these to visually pop out, hopefully, subtly. Hopefully this button's not the only focus of your website, but you could use these in conjunction together to guide the user through an experience you want to be like easily curated. And sometimes you don't want a bunch of text telling them what to do. You just want a bunch of colors, shadows, other kinds of things that show them where they should go next in the process. And we can't forget pseudo. Pseudo is very important. You have pseudo selectors. And so things like hover, focus is something active, making something disabled. Literally, Chakra does not leave anything out right here. And it's as easy as just doing a underscore and then putting what kind of pseudo element or selector in here you want. And you could, if you want to put down hover, when you hover over this, the font weight is semi-bold, and it's that easy to go on with the rest of your coding. And here's some other props as well. This is kind of, I guess, the junk drawer. You have white space, visibility, transform, appearance. So anything that you may be using and you're like, well, I don't see that in this category or that category. I assure you they haven't left it out. And so all you have to do is scroll down here and just see the other kinds of things that you could add in as a style prop. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty neat. Even if this is a bit redundant, and even if this is a bit redundant of a section, you should walk away knowing that, hey, for my company, for my personal website, for whatever it is, if I want to do it and I want to style it a certain way, it will never tell me no. Now, this is the last thing here, the as prop. And this is, I think, really interesting and something not to be glossed over. We have the as prop, and it says the as prop is a feature that all of our components allow you to pass an HTML tag for the component to be rendered. So if you don't want something rendered as, say, a button right here, you could have it rendered as a link. And when we go to use things like a box, which we'll do plenty of, a box is kind of this amorphous, could be anything type of component. So as you can see here, this button is now a link, which is really powerful. There's some libraries, and I think even in this one too, you could have specific links, but sometimes for whatever reason, you don't want a link and then nest a button in it, or reverse, and then you go to test and it's weird because you can't quite target the button because it's wrapped in a link. Here, you could just say, hey, when I click on this button, I want to go to this website. That's pretty cool. If you have a box, which we're going to go over, and you want to make that into, I don't know, anything else you want it to be, you could just say as, and you can make it like an H1 element. You can make it a paragraph tag. You could do anything you want to. And that is really cool when it comes to flexibility. So in the next section, we're going to be looking at is actually the gradient, because I think I want to get my hands a little dirty and show you all some coding. So let's get to it. All right, so we will get our hands dirty here shortly, but it's important to go over the documentation and kind of get an idea of what we could do with the gradient feature here. Now, gradients, you could get really crazy, do all sorts of cool, awesome, artsy stuff that I even myself are trying to learn, get into. But we should just start with the basics. And as you want to advance your own skills, you could do those solo discovery adventures. But let's look at the top here. So with gradients, it says gradients are a way to have transition between two or more colors. You can add gradient support using any of the following style props. So we have BG gradient, BG clip, and then background clip. These two down here for the BG clip and background clip seem to be good for text. And up here is more of like a theme aware gradients. So the big thing I wanted to get into though is the background gradient API. So we have linear, we have radial, and it says right here that you could have repeating linear, conic, and all the other stuff you traditionally would in regular CSS. So that's super cool. But like in the last section, we have 2T, 2TR, all this other jazz here. And this translates almost like a sentence. I really kind of like the smoothness of this. Two top right, two bottom. And that's super cool because if you're going to the top, what's important is where are you starting when you go to put your colors. And so if you're going to the top, that means you're starting from the bottom. Because if we're doing this from a linear perspective, if you're going towards one direction and it's a straight line, you must be starting at the opposite section. And with radial, I do believe you start from the innermost section and you work your way outward. Now with like the iconic and other styles out there. You'd have to look that up yourself. But for the basics, that's probably what you need to know to get up and going and just create basic stuff out there. So if we're looking at the usage right here, we have a box and we have the BG gradient. It's linear, as you can see, from one area to another. It's changing colors. Nothing fancy or funky is really going on. And it says to right. And so that means we're going this way, which makes sense because we start with the green 200 and then we end at the pink 500. You could also customize colors, which is cool because rather than use the Chakra specified weighted color system, you could just use your own hex colors. So we're going to the left, which means we start from the right. And so we have this hex value that eventually blends into this value right here. Once again, to left, you always just start on the opposite side. So if you go into top right, you're always starting right here in this corner. We have the multicolor. So you could, I think, almost throw as many damn colors in here as you want to, which is neat as well. We're getting this really awesome spring, I don't know, sunset feel, chill kind of vibe going on right here. And as you can see from the previous examples, we have a lot more colors going in here. So feel free to get creative, do some fun stuff with it, because, I mean, that's kind of the point of CSS, right? It's the very artsy side of web. And I'm just going to come down here to the text gradient. And I think it's important to know because you're obviously going to want to have cool backgrounds if you're going to have a gradient, but I've also seen good uses of gradient in text. And to refer to the top here of the documentation, you have the BG gradient. We're going to left, and we can see the color change here, but we're also telling this component that this is going to be a text. So it's going to make the text itself through the CSS, make it aware that this is going to be a textual item. And so don't forget this, the BG clip. And you could also have these responsive gradients too. So this one, it says you could control the responsiveness of gradients by specifying the gradients at different breakpoints. I'm not going to do that for this because I want to keep it as simple as possible. But just know that at certain breakpoints, screen width sizes, all that jazz, you're able to control how your product is going to be displayed. And lastly here, changing a gradient with pseudo props. Pseudo props are fun friends from the previous section. We can see here we have a hover. So when you hover over this, it changes this from a linear to right, meaning you're starting at the left, which makes sense. We have this red 500 and we're going to a yellow 500 right here. So now let's get our hands dirty, dive in with the fun stuff, and just do some quick gradient work. So for our coding section, what I'm going to do is take a box, which I think just renders to a standard div, and I'm going to put a button inside of it to make it look somewhat pretty and presentable. And both are going to have the same linear gradient. And when you click the button, it's going to rotate the direction by which the linear gradient moves. So let me build this out and we'll have a little project at the end because I feel that sometimes that does help out. And so we have this right here. This is very basic. I haven't saved it yet just because I don't want any formatting issues to occur. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this box and this button, as I've already stated, where the button's inside of the box. This left 20%, top 20% is really just kind of a makeshift way of getting it close-ish, whatever that word is, to the center. This is just a quick and dirty example. And the gradients here, what I'm actually going to do is have an use state array above of all the directions. And then when I click the button, I'm going to increment the indexed and cycle through all of them. Now that this is set up here, I'm going to walk you through the code because I feel it's kind of a bad practice to just slap some of this together, click and say we're done. Plus, I copied and pasted some of this in because I made a mistake the last time I recorded this, and I just didn't want to type it all out again. And so we have the box, we have the button, we have the same gradient coming through here. It's a linear gradient starting at red 100, and it moves to blue 300. And I typed it out this way, and so it allows me in the JSX to go through and dynamically get the direction and then the index here, because this is the value that needs to be changed. So when I click on rotate gradient, it's going to come up here, and on line 18, it's going to ask if the index, which is this U state here, is equal to the last value in the array, then go to the first value. So go to the index here, and it will start back from when it goes to top left, it'll go to top. And it's just cycling through it there. There's probably a better way, an easier way of doing this, but with examples, whatever. I'm just showing you how to do this. So let's go ahead and click. And before that, actually, let me do one thing, because I like spelling some stuff out explicitly. Let's do this. Now, I always recommend wrapping this in some kind of text typography, if I could speak, or something to give it more meaning and value. But since this is a quick example, I'm just slapping some text in here and rendering above. So right now we're in index, that's kind of hard to say fast, 0, and we're at 2t, which is accurate. So as we click this button, we should go to index 1, and that should be to top right. And we see that is the case. And then we start over at the beginning again. I recommend y'all go ahead and get your hands dirty with the gradients if you want to use them. I wouldn't say overuse them, but this is a quick little project to show you how to go through them, how to use them. They're fun experiment. And if you like this, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next video.